Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, was the department able to provide documentation to you that personnel at the rank of sergeant through inspector and the civilians in a supporting role attended periodic in-service training coordinated by the Command Coordination Bureau as is required by a directive of the department?
No, that was one of the issues, that they could not provide us with the documentation on many of the training, and that will end up being brought up again in our Training Services Bureau review, which you all will be getting sometime in mid-March.
So who's been responsible for the training of the department's sworn and civilian personnel, both before and after January 6th?
Well, on paper, technically, that would be the chief's responsibility, obviously being the chief. But that would come under whoever is in charge of the Training Services Bureau. But again, my report or review is going to show you that it's so disconnected. There is no one source to track all this training and to ensure that it is being done.
So just to follow through on that point, was it the Capitol Police Board that was ultimately responsible, or would you say it was so fragmented and fractured that nobody was responsible?
It's fragmented, but certainly it would be the chief of police, not the board, but it would certainly be the chief's responsibility to make sure that all training is being completed.
Okay, in your review of the K-9 unit, you found that in FY 18 through 20, K-9 officers failed to complete either basic radiation pager training or the refresher radiation pager training. In 2019, 10 K-9 officers did not complete the radiation pager training, and one officer did not complete any training at all between FY 18 and FY 20. Does the failure to train K-9 officers affect the security of the Capitol complex, and how severely was that a factor on January 6th?
I wouldn't say it was a factor on January 6th, but it certainly could be a factor on the overall security and posture for the Capitol and providing the security within the Capitol complex. We can't make the link saying that that was a factor in January 6th, but certainly as the overall day-to-day operations, it can become a factor.
Who's ultimately responsible for making sure that the mandatory K-9 training takes place?
Ultimately, again, it would come down, being the chief as the head of the agency, it would be ultimately his responsibility.
You found that the monthly 16 hours of maintenance training required for K-9 officers was not being completed. Specifically, you found that, quote, none of the K-9 officers had completed all 16 hours of monthly maintenance training during the sample month of December 2020. Could this failure to train result in a K-9 unit failing to be able to detect a possible IED or other hazardous material being brought onto the Capitol complex?
It certainly could provide that vulnerability, not being able to properly detect those devices or even vapor wake dogs. So certainly it could degrade your level of confidence.
Okay, you also found the department's Dignitary Protection Division training program is self-managed and comprised of instructors with collateral duties as active DPD officers. What are the deficiencies and dangers of having a self-managed training program, and how does that compare to the best practice standard?
Best practice standard is completely separate, and that training would be conducted by non-operational individuals, although they have the subject matter expertise in it. But by allowing your own internal folks, in the sense of operational, one training can slip through because they have other duties that they're going to be completing. So training is not going to be a top priority for them completing because they're doing the other duties. And it doesn't allow for that separation of duties where you are assured that that training is being completed and is correct and is mission driven.
Okay, now big picture, Mr. Bolton, because all of us as members, and I think a lot of the staff know members of the Capitol Police Force, we are impressed by their heroism, their sacrifice, both of which were demonstrated on January 6th when they literally put their lives on to save, put their lives on the line to save our lives, to save Congress, the vice president's life, the peaceful transfer of power. And yet there's a disconnect between their commitment and passion and a number of these problems in the management of the force. How would you explain to somebody just looking at this from the outside what's gone wrong here?
I think it goes back to initially when my first hearing before this committee is a cultural change where we need to quit thinking of ourselves as a police department, that we're going out and policing, that we are a protective agency, that our number one duty and our mission in all training, no matter what it is going to be driven by that mission of protection. And that way, what little hours we get in training, because those are difficult, operational needs are extreme right now, but that training has to be mission driven specifically.